This is Andrew Goldberg, and this is my presentation on my CUNY Data604 final project, which was the modeling passenger flow of the Chiang Mai International Airport in Thailand. A little background. The main purpose here is to model the wait times and passenger flow of the Chiang Mai International Airport in Thailand. I am currently visiting the area as a digital nomad. That's where people come to work through the internet. They don't actually need to be located in any specific place. Also, throughout my professional life, I've traveled a lot, so I've been through many different airports. Some of them good, some of them bad, but I've gone through enough to be a little bit curious about their layout and passenger flow. The Chiang Mai International Airport, which is abbreviated as CNX, is an international airport, and it does serve some international destinations, but it mostly relies on domestic flights like to Bangkok. Thailand's focus on tourism and hospitality, coupled with the relatively low labor costs, allow for very high staffing levels, good service, and quick wait times. Some of the peer-reviewed literature and other sources that I looked at throughout my research gathering phase. The most important one was methods of airport terminal passenger flow simulation, which provided several baseline statistics for check-in, self-service check-in, self-service baggage drop, and security screening processing times. Another important research was flow analysis and security issues in airport terminals using modeling and simulation, which provided an example of an arrival process flow, which I emulated to some extent, as well as a methodology to model passenger arrival rates based on plane departure schedule, which I emulated to more degree. Another important research that I used was passenger-based predictive modeling of airline no-show rates, which I used to model no-show passenger rates, which is about 10%, which I used for the arrival rates based on the plane departure schedule. A few others are listed, but they weren't quite as paramount in my data gathering. Here's a layout diagram. On the left is a hand-drawn diagram of the airport. You can see on the first floor, on the domestic side, there's one domestic exit and two domestic entrances. And then on the international side, there's just one of each. When you first come into the airport, you can see kind of a row of domestic counter check-in and baggage handling clerks, and then there's a break, and then you can see another large row of international check-in counter and baggage handling clerks on the international side. There's two domestic escalators that take you to the second floor, which is the departure area. There's one sideways international escalator. It also had stairs, but I didn't see anyone actually on the stairs. Along with the clerk check-ins, there's also a self-service check-in kiosk. There were about 4 of them when I went. And then there's also a self-service drop-off for baggage for the people that use the kiosks. And there are a few of those as well. On the second floor, on the domestic side, there's obviously 2 escalator landings. When you come up them, you see a row of shops, mostly tourism and coffee shops. And then you see a fairly long but quickly moving security queue, which leads to the ID ticket checks and the X-ray machines. There's about 3 ID checkers. They stand beside the line and look at your passport or ID and your ticket as you're moving past them. So it's a very quick process. There's 3 of them, and there's about 3 X-ray machines. There's probably room for 2 more. Based on the different size of the doors they were on. 2 more ticket checks, obviously no more X-ray machines. There 3 of 3 were in use. And they lead to a domestic departures waiting room. On the second floor, on the international side, there's obviously 1 escalator landing. It led to a very quick security queue, which was had room for a lot of people, but when I was there, there was almost completely empty. There's 1 ID checker, room for maybe 2 or 3, and then there are 2 extra machines, but only 1 was in use at the time. and those lead to international departures and waiting rooms. On the right, you can see my model rendering. It's a slightly more simplified version, just because it only has what is necessary to go through the model. You can see it has both an international and domestic entrance. The international entrance leads to an international check-in. Domestic leads to a self-service kiosk or check-in counter. They were split, and then the self-service kiosk leads to the kiosk baggage drop. From there, all points lead to the escalators. There's one international escalator. I used only one visual domestic escalator, only because it didn't make, it was kind of visual noise to use two of them. Although I actually used, I doubled the capacity. The international escalator had a capacity of 20, the domestic escalator had a capacity of 40. And then they lead to the ID checkers, the x-rays, and then the waiting rooms. Here's the flowchart and the process diagram slides. The structure in the process diagram is fairly complicated, but I guess I'll walk through very slowly. It starts with the domestic and international passenger arrivals. Some research used regularized inter-arrival times. I decided, based on one of the research studies that I read, to try to pin it down to the actual arrival times of each of the planes coming in. So what I first did is I went to the website, I took a list of all the arrivals, and then I looked at the plane type of each, and then I researched the capacity, total maximum capacity of each plane, and then I couldn't find a standard capacity or an average capacity per plane over the time. So I just used 85%, which seemed right. And then I used the 10% no-show rate, which I was able to find in research. What I did is, after I had each plane arrival, I then created a deviation for each arrival time. Usually passengers show up between 2 to 3 hours at a time, so I used a uniform distribution of negative 180 minutes, which is 3 hours at a time, up to negative 60 minutes, which is an hour ahead of time, to model actual passenger arrivals. And then for the check-in counters, there were about 40 check-in counters, domestic check-in counters, of which I only observed 20 clerks. So I used that as the initial model, although obviously it can go up to 40 as a potential. I both watched and timed a few check-in routines, as well as I looked at the research. I ended up with a random triangular distribution service time of about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes mode, and then a maximum of 2.5 minutes. For the international side, I counted about 30 counters, 15 to 13 observed clerks, depending on when I was there, and then I used the same random triangular distribution service time. For the self-service kiosks, there are 4 domestic kiosks when I was there. The research that I looked at and some of the times that I witnessed gave me a rough estimation of about 2 minutes minimum, 2.5 minute mode, and a 3.5 minute maximum distribution. And then the baggage only counter, again, I used part timing in person and journal research to come up with a 0.75 minute 1 and 2 minute random triangular distribution. There's about 2 baggage counters in use. They kind of used some of the empty counters, and they kind of used some specialized ones, so it could probably go up to 4 or 5, which I allowed for the interventional model, but in this case there are only 2 being used at the same time, or being used when I visited. The escalators, as I discussed before, there's 2 escalators on the domestic side, 1 set of stairs, although the stairs were very lightly used. Each escalator holds about 20 people at a time, and according to both what I watched and a slightly longer journal approximation. I ended up with about a random triangular distribution of 115 minimum, about 180-second mode, or about 3 minutes, and then 210-minute maximum for both the international and domestic. And then I used the capacity of 40 for the domestic and a capacity of 20 for the international. Once I got to the second floor, as I discussed before, there was a three ID ticket checkers at the domestic security. There's room for two more. I used a random triangular distribution of 1, 4, and 5 seconds, which I also copied from a journal, and I estimated myself. Uh, the queue was long, although it was not due to the ID checkers, it was due to the X-ray machines. So I initially played with the buffer on the model, although I ended up just attributing the longer wait to the X-ray machines to make the modeling interventional model be able to more accurately ascribe the wait times to the escalators. I used the same proportions for the international security, although, as I discussed before, there was only one X-ray machine working out of two. And then on the X-ray machines, I used a random triangular distribution of 0.75 minutes, 1 minute, and 1.5 minutes. Again, estimated based on both in-person timing and a journal timing. I couldn't find a journal with the cost of running an escalator per day, but I guessed about $2,000, and there was about 4 to 5 staffers on each machine. And then on the right, you can see the flow chart. It's very simple, and I'm sure what the domestic side leads to either the check-in counter or the check-in kiosk. The check-in kiosks were used on a much lesser extent, so I attributed 5%, even though some of the journals I read put it up to 15 to 30%, which is probably an American kiosk, and then 95% for the check-in counters on the domestic side. From there, it leads to the escalators, the ID checkers, X-ray machines, and then the domestic departure or international departure waiting rooms. The verification and the validation methods that I used. So on the verification side, the simulation used several verification methods to ensure conceptual accuracy. The initial inputs are based on previous studies. So for the escalator, the study said 254 seconds. I felt that was a little long. The study was actually based on, I think, the London Underground escalators. So a lot of times, subway escalators go through a few levels. They're a little bit longer. But it was a good first approximation. The methods for terminal simulation, which was my most used journal, suggested a 90 to 150-second check-in clerk, which was about similar to what I timed myself. It gave a check-in kiosk of about 100 to 200 seconds, which was again close. Terminal processing time for self-storage baggage drop about 30 to 90 seconds. Security X-ray machine processing time of 60 to 90 seconds. Walking speed of passengers, which I just used straightforwardly without timing myself, at about 1.7 miles per hour, and a no-show rate of 10%. I also used Italian output statistics for each of the processes and wait times to ensure there was no bugs or outlier statistics. On the validation side, I used a simulation, used several validation methods to ensure an accurate portrayal of the TNX flow. So I used in-person processing time measurements. I went there and I timed it myself. The sample sizes were not as large, but they still gave a rough estimation. The escalator, which originally in the journal was 254 seconds, I came to about 121 second average time. The check-in clerks were about 90 to 150 seconds on paper. I got similar to around 143 seconds. The X-rays, I got about the average between 60 and 90 seconds, a little bit lower. And then on the ID checkers, I got 6 seconds. There's a few ID checker statistics, but they were much longer because they were based on American ID checkers, which require a queue. You walk out to them, they look at your passport, they stare at your eyes, and it takes a little bit longer. And then I also looked at in-person wait time measurements. The domestic check-in wait was about on the model about 2.3 minutes based on the journals, and then in-person average statistic was about 1 minute. So I kind of split them for what I ended up using. The X-ray was 5.3 minutes on the journals. I ended up measuring timing about 3.2 minutes, although it was difficult because I couldn't actually get into the X-ray machine. I had to watch it from afar because I wasn't actually a ticketed passenger. Because it's validation, there's also a subjective view of the data to make sure it just passes the sniff test. Have extensive experience with airports, and I just looked at the wait time statistics in the model flow. I just made sure it made sense, and I adjusted it accordingly throughout as well. So what I did is I used the for the baseline model status quo. I used the numbers that I witnessed, somewhere around 3:20 on a Sunday, and then I guess I'll go through those numbers. The check-in clerks, they're about 32, and I use a status quo average wait time about 3.25 minutes. There are 4 self-service kiosks. The wait time is 1.92. Self-service baggage of three capacity. There's very little wait times. And ID checkers, there's 3. There's almost no wait times on the model. X-rays, there are 3. There's a longer wait time of 5.31 minutes, and then there's a total wait time about 11.23 minutes. And on the international side, there's 26 check-in clerks, and then the status quo average wait times is very low because there are far more check-in clerks than international flights. ID checkers, there's only 1, very low wait time. X-rays, we're at about 15 minutes, just because there was 1 and the lines did add up. So for the international side, I just used an optimized model based on the OptiFlow modeling. I use total cost as the mainline response statistic to minimize. And then I also added satisfaction levels as a variable, as a response variable. And in a nutshell, what happened was that it decided that it could go much lower on the international side to increase costs, and it wouldn't hurt the satisfaction, while it decided that it could help with the satisfaction while also lowering costs by increasing the amount of self-service kiosks and self-service baggage on the domestic side. So it increased self-service kiosks from 4 to 8, and self-service baggage from 3 to 5, as well as the check-in clerks from 32 to 40, which is the maximum, and added 1 ID checker, while reducing the X-rays from 3 to 2, because that saved a good amount of money. Overall, it cut about 1.77 minutes from the check-in process, and it added 2.62 minutes to the X-ray wait time, but overall it cut about 2 minutes and 17 seconds total, while the international side stayed the same. Looking at a statistical comparison, the average differences between the means was outside of the half widths of the standard deviations. So the assumption is that they're clean differences, and that it's not, those differences of the international model are not due to chance, and that was very clear on both the difference in the domestic check-in wait, the domestic kiosk waiting times, domestic X-ray waiting times, and the overall domestic waiting times of a change of 2.17 minutes. And then as well on the very small uptick in international waiting time. So the conclusions is that the Chiang Mai International passenger throughput is currently flowing very well. It does not need major improvements. However, should the airport look for further efficiencies, it could add additional domestic departure self-serve kiosks and baggage drops, which is an affordable way to expand the check-in process capacity and reduce waiting times. It could further raise domestic departure check-in and ID check levels during peak times to reduce waiting times. And if it wanted to save money, it could reduce hours of the third domestic X-ray machine, possibly during times in which there are lower weights, maybe the morning and the later afternoon. So overall, what I learned was a lot actually. While the airport flow diagrams are fairly straightforward on this model, it was actually a very complicated process to get all of the inputs and distributions and arrival schedules to fit the model reasonably, pass a sniff test, and feel like it was a real world airport flow. So it took a lot of minor adjustments and playing with the process add-ins to get it to work. Reading through several of the academic papers also gave me an appreciation for the current depth of research into these topics, as well as a whole new topic silo of knowledge on passenger flow and airport wait times that I'm sure I'll be able to display among future clients. Um, Further experience working with Simio is also enjoyable, became more fun as I got more and more used to it, especially building a complicated model from scratch and again fitting the real world data to a statistical simulation. That is it. Let me know if anyone has any questions about the Chiang Mai International Airport. It was a very challenging class, although I enjoyed a lot of aspects to it, and I felt like I learned a lot as well. So thank you. Take care.